The day had started perfectly for Gerald Whitman. He had arrived at Midwest Trust Bank 30 minutes early, the autumn air crisp against his skin as he unlocked the heavy glass doors. For 23 years, he had ruled this marble-floored branch like a king presiding over his quiet kingdom. Every morning, he walked the lobby with a sense of pride, adjusting the blinds just so, smoothing out the guest chairs, inspecting the polish on the floors. To Gerald, these details mattered. They were part of the image of stability and professionalism. He believed separated his bank from the world outside. By 2 in the afternoon, the rhythm of the day had become steady and predictable. Retirees trickled in to deposit checks, small business owners came by for routine transactions, and a few college kids wandered in with questions about overdraft fees. Gerald loved days like this, calm, orderly, without drama. He leaned back, in his leather chair, watching the afternoon sun pour through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the gold lettering etched on the glass doors. To him, it was more than a bank lobby. It was his stage, and he was the main act, and then the door opened. The man who stepped in was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a quiet presence that made people glance twice without knowing why. He wore a plain charcoal hoodie, its hood down, and jeans that had seen better days. In his right hand was a black leather folder, scuffed at the edges but held with care, as though it contained something priceless. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Immediately he had seen this type before, at least in his mind. Men who came in dressed too casually, asking for too much, expecting miracles they hadn't earned. He called them dreamers with no real money. They always came with big plans, wild stories, and folders stuffed with what turned out to be half-baked paperwork. He could spot them from a mile away. As the man crossed the lobby, conversations dipped slightly, a ripple of awareness passing through the space. Gerald sat up straighter, his instincts firing. To him, trouble had just walked in. The man approached the desk with a calm confidence that irritated Gerald even more. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around nervously like most people who felt out of place in a bank like this. He simply walked straight to the manager's desk, placed the folder down with quiet precision, and met Gerald's gaze. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'd like to discuss my business loan application." The politeness of the words only sharpened Gerald's suspicion. He looked the man up and down. No suit, no tie, no sign of wealth or refinement. Just a hoodie and jeans. Gerald almost laughed. A dozen thoughts spun through his head at once. What kind of collateral could this man possibly have? What kind of business does he think he can run? People like him don't walk into Midwest Trust asking for millions. Outwardly, Gerald forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, his tone already sharpened with condescension. The man didn't flinch. "No, I thought it best to come in person." Gerald's chest tightened with irritation. He prided himself on protecting the bank from fraud. That was his mantra, his shield. And here, standing across from him, was a perfect example of what he believed he had to guard against. A man who didn't fit the picture of legitimate wealth. He glanced at the leather folder on his desk as if it might stain the surface. Then he looked back up, his smile thinning into a sneer. "Well," Gerald said, his voice carrying across the polished marble lobby, "let's see what kind of dream you've brought with you today." The man didn't break eye contact. He simply folded his hands, waiting, patient and unshaken. For the first time all day, Gerald felt something unexpected. Unease. And the bank, which had been calm and orderly only moments before, suddenly felt like a stage about to erupt into something he couldn't control. The lobby had gone still, the kind of silence that hangs when people sense they are about to witness something uncomfortable. Gerald Whitman, perched behind his polished oak desk, let the pause stretch on purpose. He enjoyed control, the way silence could press against. a person's nerves, forcing them to squirm. But the man standing before him didn't squirm. He didn't blink. He stood steady, hands folded, eyes locked on Gerald, with a quiet patience that somehow felt more dangerous than anger. Gerald's lips curved into a thin smile, the kind he wore when he wanted to remind everyone that he was the authority here. He leaned back in his chair, interlaced his fingers, and raised his voice just enough to carry across the marble lobby. "Well," he said, drawing the word out like a blade being unsheathed, "you walked in here without an appointment with, what, a folder of papers you printed at home? And you expect me to approve a multi-million-dollar loan?" Heads turned. Customers at the teller line shifted uneasily. Mrs. Patterson, seated with her checkbook at the side desk, frowned, her pen hovering mid-air. Near the ATM in the corner, a teenager with bright purple earbuds tugged her phone free and angled it toward the scene, instinctively sensing drama worth sharing. The man in the hoodie, calm, still, unshaken, didn't flinch. He simply replied, "Yes, that is correct." Gerald's laugh was sharp, rehearsed, the kind of laugh he had used before when shooing away time-wasters. He tapped his fingers on the folder with theatrical disdain. "Do you have any idea what kind of collateral $3.5 million requires? We're not talking about a car loan or a small business line of credit. We're talking reality, hard assets, deep reserves, credible references. This bank does not entertain fantasies." The word fantasies echoed in the lobby, bouncing off the marble walls, clinging to the ears of everyone listening. A few people exchanged glances. The teenager's livestream viewer count ticked upward. 347, 521, 698, numbers climbing so quickly she could barely read the flood of comments. The man remained silent. His stillness unnerved Gerald. Most people protested by now, fumbled for words or grew defensive. This one simply stood, like someone waiting for a storm to pass. Gerald leaned forward, lowering his voice but dripping it with poison. "People, like you walk in here every few months. Big dreams, no substance. I know your type." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. "People like you." The phrase hung heavy, unmistakable and ugly. A ripple passed through the customers. Mrs. Patterson sat straighter, her frown deepening. Maria Gonzalez, the young teller behind bulletproof glass, felt her stomach twist. She had seen injustice before, but never so nakedly, never so boldly displayed for an entire lobby to witness. The man's phone buzzed against the desk. For the briefest moment, the screen lit up. Deputy Director Carter, U.S. Treasury. He declined the call without, looking down, his eyes never leaving Gerald's face. The buzzing drew Gerald's attention, and his irritation flared hotter. "What is this, then? Some government scam? Another program where taxpayers carry the risk while people like you play pretend entrepreneurs?" The teenager gasped audibly, her live stream comments exploding. "Is this real? This man is insane." "Name and badge number now." Maria Gonzalez pressed a trembling hand to her lips, whispering to the teller beside her. "He can't say that out loud. Not here. Not with everyone watching." Gerald grabbed a bottle of hand sanitizer from his desk drawer, pumping a generous amount into his palms, as if the very presence of this man contaminated him. He rubbed it in slowly, eyes locked on the calm figure across from him. "You know," he said loudly, "banks like this protect legitimate customers from fraud. We don't hand out millions to people off the street with big ideas and no proof." The word fraud shot through the room like electricity. Several customers pulled out their phones now, recording. The lobby transformed into a courtroom. Gerald, the accuser, the man in the hoodie, the silent defendant, and everyone else the jury. At last the man spoke, his voice so quiet it forced the room to lean in. "Sir, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Oh no," Gerald said, raising his voice so the entire bank could hear. "Transparency is important. Everyone here deserves to know what kind of schemes are being attempted." The teenager. whispered into her phone camera. "Y'all, he's calling him a fraud in front of everybody. This is insane. Someone tag the news." The viewer count soared. Security guard David Torres shifted near the glass doors, one hand resting on his belt. He had been trained to recognize danger, but the man at the desk didn't give off the energy of a threat. He gave off something else, something harder to name: authority, a quiet authority that seemed almost unnatural. Gerald leaned closer, his voice now tinged with mock sympathy. "You're embarrassing yourself, my friend. Walk out now before I have to involve the authorities." The man's eyes narrowed the slightest fraction, and for the first time his composure cracked just enough to reveal something else. Not fear, not shame. Power, contained, restrained, but undeniable. And in that moment, for reasons he couldn't explain, Gerald Whitman felt the faintest tremor of doubt. But pride is a stubborn thing. So he straightened, spread his arms like a performer in front of an audience, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we may need to call the police. It seems we have ourselves a potential fraudster." The lobby gasped, phones tilted higher, and the first siren of true suspense wailed silently through the bank, promising that nothing about this perfect day would ever be the same again. The marble lobby had transformed into something Gerald Whitman never imagined in all his 23 years of managing Midwest Trust Bank. A stage, a trap, a powder keg waiting for its spark. The air was no longer calm and predictable. It was tight, buzzing, alive with the hum of anticipation. Phones were out, customers were whispering, but their whispers weren't small. They were sharp and spreading like cracks in glass. Near the ATM, 17-year-old Zoe Chen held her phone aloft, her hand trembling, but not from fear, excitement. She was streaming live to her modest following of a few hundred. The second Gerald had said the word fraud, her chat had erupted like fireworks on the 4th of July. Viewer counts that normally crawled in 2s and 3s now leapt in hundreds. 521, 847, file 203. The numbers kept racing. The comments rolled. So fast she couldn't keep up. "What bank is this? Get his badge number. Oh my God, is this 2024 or 1924? The lobby, however, wasn't watching Zoe's screen. They were watching Gerald. And Gerald was basking in it, mistaking the attention for approval. His voice carried with practiced authority, the same tone he'd used for years to put unqualified applicants in their place. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, gesturing toward the tall black man in the hoodie, "this is what we deal with. Online applications from people who think millions are handed out for dreams. We protect real customers from scams." The shy words sliced through the room. Maria Gonzalez flinched behind the teller glass. She wanted to vanish, but the truth was she couldn't stop staring at the man in the hoodie. Unlike Gerald, who seemed to grow more animated with every sentence, the man remained still, his hands folded loosely over the leather folder on Gerald's desk. His face was unreadable, composed, almost unnervingly so. Maria's heart pounded. Because she knew what it meant. He was letting Gerald dig his own grave. The man's phone buzzed again. The screen lit briefly. U.S. Treasury Deputy Director Carter. Without glancing down, he pressed decline. A ripple of unease passed through. Security guard David Torres, as he caught the name. Treasury? That wasn't a coincidence. He shifted his weight, hand hovering near his radio, though he still hadn't decided who here was the real threat. "Sir," the man finally said, his voice calm but strong enough to command silence, "perhaps you should look at the documentation before making accusations." Gerald barked a laugh. "Documentation. I glanced at the first page. I don't need to waste time on the rest. People like you come in with doctored statements, fake references, maybe a credit score printed off some website, and think you can walk away with a fortune. Not in my branch." The phrase hung in the air again. "People like you." This time, it landed heavier, Mrs. Patterson, who had been scribbling at her side desk, finally set her pen down. At 73, she had seen her share of arrogance, but there was something about Gerald's tone that made her pulse quicken with indignation. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't sure yet if she would speak, but she knew she couldn't ignore this much longer. Meanwhile, Zoe's livestream exploded past 2,000 viewers. "Y'all, he just said, people like you again. This is wild. Somebody called the news. I'm tagging Channel 7. She adjusted her phone to capture both Gerald's smirk and the man's stoic posture. The comments turned savage. "This manager's done for. Expose him. Sheer racism." The man in the hoodie didn't react. That was what unnerved Gerald the most. No anger, no pleading, no attempt to explain himself. Just patience. It felt less like a customer being denied and more like a hunter waiting for his prey to step closer to the trap. Gerald, oblivious to the silent power before him, pressed harder. "You know what? Let's save everyone time. I'll call the police. Right now. We've had too many fraud attempts lately. They'll sort this out." Maria's stomach dropped. She whispered almost to herself, "No, don't do this." But Gerald was already reaching for the phone, every movement deliberate, every gesture meant for the crowd watching. He dialed with flair, announcing each digit like a judge reading a verdict. 911. Zoe's livestream viewership shot upward again, 3,000, 3,800, 4,500. The chat was screaming, "Oh my God, he's calling the cops." "This man's career is over. Midwest Trust Bank, Commerce Street branch," Gerald said into the receiver, his voice swelling with self-importance. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual attempting financial fraud. Black male, mid-40s, refusing to leave after loan denial." The entire bank froze. Maria gasped aloud. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened in disbelief. David Torres's jaw tightened. The man did not move. He simply sat, breathing evenly, watching Gerald like one might watch a child throw a tantrum. His phone buzzed again, the caller ID lighting up with FBI Special Agent Williams. He declined without breaking eye contact. "Officers will be here in 10 minutes, Gerald announced proudly, hanging up the phone with a flourish. He spread his arms like he had just saved the day. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you gather your things and leave before this becomes a criminal matter." The silence that followed was broken only by the tapping of phone cameras and the whisper of furious livestream comments. The viewer count surged to 8,000. And at that precise moment, the calm, patient man across the desk allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch his lips, an expression so controlled, so deliberate, that even Gerald felt something cold curl. In the pit of his stomach, for the first time that day, he realized he might have made a mistake. The atmosphere in the bank was no longer that of a financial institution. It had shifted into something raw, charged, and dangerous. Every tick of the clock above the teller windows seemed louder than the last, echoing through the marble lobby like a countdown. The stage had been set. A manager drunk on his own authority, a man in a hoodie who refused to be rattled, and a crowd of witnesses armed with smartphones, broadcasting the entire ordeal to thousands. Gerald Whitman, flushed with the self-satisfaction of his 911 call, leaned back in his chair with the smug posture of a man convinced he had already won. His hand hovered over the leather folder as though touching it too much might taint his desk. His voice, loud enough to be heard by everyone in the lobby, dripped with disdain. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me be absolutely clear," he announced, sweeping his arm toward the man in the hoodie like a prosecutor presenting his case. "This individual has attempted to apply for a multi-million-dollar loan without proper collateral. We've seen these kinds of scams before. They always come with fake documents and inflated claims. But here at Midwest Trust, we do things by the book. We protect our real customers from fraud." The word fraud struck the air again. sparking a murmur of discomfort among the onlookers. Maria Gonzalez pressed her hand against the counter as though to steady herself. The blood pounded in her ears, every instinct screaming that what Gerald was doing wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. But fear held her tongue. The man in the hoodie, calm, still, his expression unreadable, did not interrupt. His silence only made him seem more formidable. And then, for the first time since the spectacle began, a new voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, young man." It was Mrs. Elizabeth Patterson. She rose slowly from her seat at the side desk, her designer handbag clasped firmly in one hand. At 73, her back was slightly stooped, but her voice was strong, steady, and filled with the kind of authority that came from decades of respect in the community. "I've been a customer here since 1983, she said, her gaze narrowing. "On Gerald, I have accounts that go back 40 years, and I've trusted this branch with more money than I care to admit in public, and what I just heard you say was absolutely unnecessary." The lobby went silent. Gerald blinked momentarily, wrong-footed but quickly forced a smile. "Mrs. Patterson, of course, I appreciate your loyalty, but you must understand, we have protocols to follow. It's my responsibility to protect clients like you from fraudsters." "Fraudsters?" Her voice cracked like a whip, sharper than anyone expected. "This gentleman has done nothing but sit at your desk quietly with his paperwork. You haven't even bothered to review it properly. Instead, you've chosen to humiliate him publicly. That is not professionalism, Gerald. That is prejudice." The word prejudice rang out like a bell. A wave of electricity surged through the room. Zoe Chen's livestream comments exploded. "Yes, Queen! Old lady spitting facts! This manager is done!" Viewer count surged to 11,000. Gerald's mask of composure faltered. He felt his grip on the situation loosening, slipping through his fingers. "With all due respect, Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice trembling slightly, under the strain of keeping it controlled, "you don't have all the facts. This is a matter of protocol. We can't take risks with people who—" "People who what?" she demanded. Her eyes blazed with indignation. "People who don't look like your idea of a millionaire? People who don't wear tailored suits? When they come in to ask about a loan? Do you hear yourself, Gerald? Do you hear what you're saying in front of all these witnesses?" Gasps rippled through the lobby. Maria's throat tightened, and for a brief moment she felt a surge of hope. Maybe Mrs. Patterson's courage would give her the strength to speak, too. David Torres, the security guard, shifted uneasily. His training told him to stay neutral, to maintain order, but he could feel it in his bones. The manager was spiraling. The quiet man in the hoodie wasn't the problem here. Gerald was. Still, Gerald wasn't ready to give up. His pride wouldn't allow it. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, raising his chin, "this man's application raises red flags. I know the signs. 23 years in this branch has taught me to trust. My instincts tell me this is trouble." All eyes turned back to the man in the hoodie, still silent, still calm. His phone buzzed again, FBI Special Agent Williams flashing across the screen. He pressed decline once more, his face betraying nothing. But then, for the first time, he spoke. His words weren't loud, but they carried with a weight that made the entire room lean in. "Mr. Whitman," he said quietly, "be very sure this is the hill you want to stand on. Because every word you've spoken since I walked into this bank has been documented." Something in his tone froze Gerald where he sat. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, a simple truth, spoken with such certainty that it made Gerald's skin crawl. Maria's breath caught. David Torres straightened instinctively, his military instincts recognizing the cadence of authority. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, as if she understood something the others didn't. Gerald's eyes darted to the phones recording him, to the customers staring, to the teenager whose live stream was climbing past 15,000 viewers. For the first time, doubt crept into his arrogance. But Pride is a stubborn beast, and Gerald clung to it like a drowning man to driftwood. He forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Document all you want," he said. "The police will be here in minutes, and when they arrive, we'll see how cooperative you really are." The man in the hoodie didn't move, didn't blink, but the faintest curl of a smile touched his lips, so subtle it could have been imagined, and at that exact moment, the bank door chimed. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence sending a shockwave through the room. The countdown had reached 0. The glass door closed behind the 2 officers with a heavy thud, and in that instant the bank lobby changed again. The atmosphere tightened, as though all the air had been sucked out. The faint hum of the overhead lights suddenly seemed deafening. Conversations died mid-breath. Every customer, every teller, every onlooker turned their eyes to the navy blue. Uniforms. Officer Martinez, tall and broad-shouldered, moved with the calm confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. His partner, Officer Johnson, younger, sharper around the edges, walked half a step behind him, hand brushing the side of his utility belt as though expecting trouble. Their boots echoed on the marble floor with a rhythm that felt like the ticking of a clock. Gerald Whitman shot up from behind his desk, puffing himself up as though these officers were his personal cavalry. Relief and pride swirled in his chest. Finally, someone was here to back him up, to confirm his authority, to sweep this nonsense away and restore his control over the room. "Officers!" Gerald said, his voice carrying loudly across the lobby. "Right here. This is the individual." All heads swiveled toward the man in the hoodie, still seated, still calm. He hadn't shifted in the slightest, his hands resting loosely on the black leather folder, eyes steady, expression unreadable. His posture was almost unnervingly casual, as if he were waiting for a bus, not sitting at the epicenter of an unfolding storm. Martinez's eyes flicked from Gerald to the man, then back again. "We received a call about possible fraud," he said carefully. "That's correct," Gerald said quickly, striding forward. He pointed a finger like an accuser in a courtroom. "This man submitted a loan application for millions with suspicious documents. When I questioned him, he refused to cooperate. I had no choice but to call you in. Protocols, you understand." Behind the bulletproof glass, Maria Gonzalez's breath caught in her throat. She whispered, "That's not what happened." Mrs. Patterson, standing now with her handbag clutched firmly in her hand, shook her head in disbelief. Her voice trembled with anger. "Suspicious? The only suspicious thing I've heard is the way you've been talking to him. Zoe's livestream viewer count shot past 19,000. The chat was a flood. Oh my God, cops are here. Pray nothing happens. This is going viral right now." Officer Johnson's eyes narrowed. He studied the man in the hoodie, calm, composed, unmoved. He leaned toward Martinez and muttered, "Doesn't look uncooperative to me." But Gerald wasn't. Finished. He gestured dramatically toward the leather folder. "He hasn't provided anything legitimate, just a stack of papers meant to waste our time. I've been doing this for 23 years, gentlemen. I know when someone's trying to scam us." The man finally lifted his head, slowly, deliberately. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but so clear it sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "I asked you to review my documents. You refused." Martinez turned to Gerald. "Is that true?" Gerald flushed. "I glanced at them. I didn't need to waste my time. It was obvious." "Obvious," Mrs. Patterson snapped, her voice ringing across the lobby. "Obvious because of what, Gerald? His paperwork or his skin color?" The room gasped. Even Maria clapped her hand over her mouth, stunned that someone had finally said it out loud. Gerald sputtered, his face red. "Mrs. Patterson, please. This is not about race. This is about protecting the bank from fraud." "Fraud?" the man repeated, and now there was a subtle shift in his tone. No longer just calm, It was laced with authority, the kind of authority that silences a room not by volume, but by gravity. "Officer Martinez, Officer Johnson, do you know what I asked Mr. Whitman for when I arrived?" Martinez studied him. "What did you ask for, sir?" "A private discussion," the man said evenly. Instead, he chose to perform for an audience. "He accused me of fraud before reviewing a single page. He threatened me. He called you." His eyes flicked to Gerald, and for the first time, something like steel glinted in his gaze. Every word of it has been documented. The word documented made Gerald's chest tighten. His arrogance wavered, just for a fraction of a second. Zoe whispered into her phone. "He's too calm. Something's up. He's not just some guy." "Watch this." Her viewer count hit 22,000. Gerald scrambled to regain control. "Documented? By what? Your phone? You can't bluff me. Officers, this man is wasting everyone's time. I strongly suggest you remove him before he causes a bigger scene." But now Officer Johnson spoke, his voice skeptical. "Remove him? For what? For asking you to look at his loan application?" The audience murmured in agreement. Maria's hands trembled with adrenaline. David Torres, the guard, took a slow step closer to the desk, watching everything with hawk-like focus. He had worked security long enough to know when the tide was turning, and the tide, without question, was turning. The man leaned forward, resting his hands on the folder. "Officers," he said, his voice low and steady, "there's been a misunderstanding, and in a few minutes, I assure you, it will be corrected." Gerald laughed harshly, but it sounded thin, brittle. "Corrected? The only thing that needs correcting is your attitude. This is my bank. I run it by the rules, and the rule is simple. People like you don't get millions handed to them." The phrase "people like you" detonated across the lobby like a grenade. Phones whipped higher into the air. Mrs. Patterson gasped. Maria's eyes filled with tears of rage. The livestream comments exploded in caps lock, and then, for the first time, since he had walked in, the man smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't boastful, it was small, deliberate, almost dangerous. The kind of smile that said, "Now you've given me exactly what I needed." Officer Martinez saw it. Officer Johnson saw it. David Torres definitely saw it, and Gerald Whitman, suddenly aware of how shaky his own footing felt, swallowed hard. The digital clock above the teller line ticked over to 3:20, 7 minutes since the phone call to 911. 3 minutes until everything changed. The clock above the teller windows glowed 3:23 p.m. Every second pulsed through the marble lobby like a heartbeat. The sound of the officers' boots on the floor had faded, but the weight of their presence lingered. The bank was no longer a place of quiet transactions. It was an arena. Phones were out in every direction. Mrs. Patterson clutched hers awkwardly, trying to angle the camera without shaking. Maria Gonzalez, who usually ducked her head and kept quiet, found her hands pressed to the counter, her breath shallow as she dared to watch this unfold. Zoe Chen's live stream had exploded. 30 minutes earlier, she'd been a bored teenager waiting for her mother. Now she was the beating heart of a viral storm, her screen flashing faster than she could blink. 25,000 viewers, 27,300, 29,112. The comments scrolled too fast to follow. "This is insane. Name the bank. Midwest Trust racism. Trend it now." And at the center of it all, Gerald Whitman puffed up his chest and raised his voice. Convinced his authority could still overpower the chaos. "Officers," he said, gesturing like a conductor in front of an orchestra. "You see what I've been dealing with. He refuses to provide legitimate documentation. He refuses to leave. When asked, he's wasting everyone's time with this performance." The words, "this performance," hit the room like a slap. It was Gerald who had been performing from the moment the man walked in, but he couldn't see it. He thought he was in control, that his audience admired his authority. But the reality, captured in a dozen camera lenses, was stark. His sneer, his tone, the sanitizer bottle still perched on his desk like a prop, the way he leaned over the seated man in the hoodie with exaggerated disdain. Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "You called us out here because he wanted you to review his loan application?" "He wouldn't leave," Gerald barked. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the first hint of desperation. He's being uncooperative." The man in the hoodie finally moved. He leaned back, slow and deliberate, as though savoring every ounce of patience he had left. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but every syllable rang in the tense silence. "Uncooperative?" He let the word hang. "I've been sitting here silently while you insult me in front of your staff, your customers, and now these officers. You accused me of fraud without reviewing my file. You called the police without cause, and you believe I'm uncooperative." The calmness in his voice unnerved everyone. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't fearful. It was the tone of someone who already knew how this story ended. Zoe whispered into her phone mic, "Y'all, he's way too calm. Something's up. He's not scared. He's waiting." Her live stream comments flooded. "He's got something. This manager is done. Watch, the twist is coming." Gerald laughed, but it was hollow now. "You can spin this however you want. I've been in this business for 23 years. I know when someone is trying to con the system. People like you." "Enough." The word was sharp, cutting, not loud but heavy with authority. It didn't come from Mrs. Patterson or Maria. It came from Officer Martinez. The entire lobby froze. "Mr. Whitman," Martinez said firmly, "you've repeated that phrase, 'people like you,' more than once. You'd better explain exactly what you mean by it," Gerald faltered. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. His confidence, once booming, now looked brittle. I mean people who don't understand banking, people who don't have the background, You mean people who don't look like your idea of a millionaire," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "That's what you mean, Gerald. Admit it." The crowd gasped again. The live-stream chat went wild. "Yes, Queen! Expose him." "He's cooked." Gerald turned red, sweat pooling on his forehead. He spun back to the officers. "You can't listen to this nonsense. He probably printed those documents from some website. Do you know how many scams target banks like ours? Do you understand the risk if I just handed over millions?" The man in the hoodie finally reached for the folder, slowly, deliberately. The zipper peeled open with a sound that seemed louder than it should have. He pulled out a stack of papers, thick, crisp, bound with polished clips. He slid them across the desk toward Gerald with the composure of someone who had nothing to fear. "Since you refuse to look, perhaps the officers would like to see." Gerald snatched the papers, ready to gloat over the flimsy contents. But as he flipped the first page, his smugness faltered. His eyes darted over letterheads: United States Treasury Department, Federal Reserve Bank, Senate Committee on Banking. His pulse hammered. He turned another page: asset statements, portfolios, government clearances, the kind of documentation that didn't just look official, it was official. "No," Gerald whispered, his face draining of color. This can't be." Maria caught her breath. Mrs. Patterson narrowed her eyes. David Torres, the security guard, took another step forward, instinctively straightening his posture like a soldier. "In formation." The man leaned forward, his voice quiet but loaded with weight. "For 23 years, you've trusted your instincts, but instincts can lie. Numbers, documents, facts, they do not." The officers glanced at one another. Martinez's jaw tightened. Johnson's eyes flicked to the cameras recording every second, and then the man's phone buzzed again, lighting up with a name that made Gerald's stomach drop: Special Agent Marcus Williams, FBI. This time the man didn't decline the call. He let the screen shine on the desk for all to see. The live stream viewer count soared past 32,000, and for the first time, Gerald Whitman's perfect day shattered completely. The glow from the digital clock read 3:27 p.m., and every eye in the lobby was fixed on the phone lying on Gerald Whitman's desk. The screen shone with a name that did not belong in a suburban bank branch: Special Agent Marcus Williams, FBI. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just the kind of silence that comes when people are unsure what to say. It was the heavy, electric quiet that builds when everyone in a room realizes the ground beneath them has shifted. Gerald's throat went dry. His arrogance, the same arrogance that had fueled every word since this man walked in, wavered. He could feel the sweat trickling down the back of his neck. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in 23 years, he was utterly speechless in his own branch. The man in the hoodie leaned back slightly, his composure unbroken. His calm felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. He let the phone buzz on the desk, its vibration rattling against the polished wood like a countdown. When it finally stopped, he slid it back into his folder without so much as a glance, as though he had the luxury of ignoring the FBI. The live stream numbers exploded: 38,000, 41,000, 45,000. Zoe Chen could barely keep her hand steady, her teenage nerves electrified by the knowledge that she was broadcasting the moment of a lifetime. The chat scrolled so fast she couldn't read it anymore. Who is he? This isn't just some guy. This is bigger than the manager thinks. Officer Martinez finally broke the silence. His voice was measured, cautious, but beneath it was something else: respect. Sir, perhaps you should explain exactly who you are. The man's eyes flicked toward Gerald before settling on the officer's. His tone was even, deliberate, and impossibly calm. I came here as a customer. I asked for a loan review. Instead, I was accused, insulted, and threatened. That was Gerald's choice, not mine. The use of Gerald's first name was surgical. It cut straight through the performance, reducing him from manager to just another man who had misjudged badly. Gerald's hands trembled as he tried to gather his bluster. You think you can intimidate me with phone calls and paperwork? I've been doing this long enough to know scams when I see them. He turned to the officers again, desperate for backup. He's bluffing. I've dealt with con artists before, and I'll bet every cent of my career this is another one. Every cent of your career, Mrs. Patterson repeated, her voice cold, sharp. You may not have a career left by the end of today, Gerald. The audience gasped again. Maria's chest heaved with adrenaline. David Torres, the guard, stiffened, as if anticipating orders from someone other than Gerald now. The man finally reached into his folder once more. But this time, it wasn't papers he pulled out. He withdrew a slim black leather wallet, the kind used only by government officials. He opened it with precise care, laying it flat on Gerald's desk for everyone to see. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Marcus Ellington, he said quietly. Chief Executive Officer of Ellington Global Holdings, Federal Reserve. Consultant, billionaire investor, and for the past 45 minutes, the subject of racial profiling by a branch manager who believed a hoodie disqualified me from wealth. The room erupted. Maria clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Mrs. Patterson let out an audible gasp. Zoe nearly dropped her phone, her stream exploding past 52,000 viewers as comments screamed, "Billionaire CEO? He's fed? Oh my God, the plot twist!" Gerald's face went white. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't form. His mind scrambled for footing, but there was none. He had called the police. He had sneered. He had said, "People like you." And every second of it was documented. Officer Johnson muttered under his breath, "Holy sh!" before catching himself. Officer Martinez stared at the badge, then at the man, then at the phones recording from every angle. "Sir," he said carefully. "Is there any additional documentation you'd like us to verify?" Marcus Ellington leaned forward, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "Mr. Whitman's conduct has already been documented by multiple witnesses and federal-grade equipment." He tapped the small digital recorder in his folder. It's red, light glowing like an accusation. "But if the officers would prefer, I can have the Treasury Secretary confirm my credentials directly." The lobby gasped again. Gerald staggered backward into his chair. His perfect day, his 23-year reputation, was collapsing in front of him. He looked like a man watching his own execution. The live-stream counter tipped over 60,000 viewers. Comments screamed across Zoe's phone. "National news now. He's finished. Arrest the manager." Gerald's phone rang suddenly, shattering the silence. He snatched it up, desperate for an anchor. The caller ID made his stomach sink. "Sandra Blake, regional manager." His voice cracked as he answered. "Gerald, what the hell is happening at your branch?" Sandra's voice was sharp, panicked, and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I've got corporate on the line. My phone is exploding, and Twitter is on fire with a hashtag about racist banking. Fix this now." Gerald's knees nearly buckled. "Sandra, I can explain. I was protecting the bank. He's not who he says." Marcus Ellington reached forward calmly, plucked the phone from Gerald's hand and pressed it to his ear. His voice was low, smooth, and devastatingly professional. "Miss Blake, this is Marcus Ellington. I assure you, I am exactly who I say I am, and your branch manager has just turned a federal compliance audit into a national scandal." The line went silent. Sandra's voice, when it returned, was barely above a whisper. "Oh my God!" The lobby went still again, all eyes on Gerald. His authority, his pride, his career crumbled to dust in the space of a heartbeat, and above it all, the live-stream viewer count hit 70,000. The world outside Midwest Trust Bank was beginning to watch. The clock glowed 3:30 p.m., and the lobby of Midwest Trust Bank had become something Gerald Whitman no longer recognized. What had once been his domain, his carefully controlled marble kingdom, now pulsed with a fevered energy he couldn't contain. Phones recorded from every angle, faces stared at him with disgust, and across from his desk sat a man who had just revealed himself to be Marcus Ellington, billionaire CEO and federal banking consultant. Gerald's mouth was dry. His thoughts, once sharp, were now muddled, stumbling over themselves in a frantic attempt to find escape. He wanted to believe this was still salvageable. He wanted to believe his 23 years of instincts would somehow protect him. But the quiet power radiating from Marcus Ellington's presence told him otherwise. The sound of police radios crackled near the front of the bank, and then the glass doors swung open again. This time the atmosphere didn't just tighten, it snapped. Two men entered, moving with the controlled confidence of federal law enforcement. Their suits were dark, their eyes sharp, their steps purposeful. One of them, tall, broad, unmistakably commanding, scanned the room with a gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. The phones raised in trembling hands, the two uniformed officers already present, the pale, sweating manager behind a desk, and the calm, unshaken man in the hoodie at the center of it all. "Special Agent Marcus Williams," he announced, his voice carrying across the marble lobby like thunder. He stepped forward, and to the shock of every witness, snapped a crisp salute toward Marcus Ellington. The bank erupted. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of feet. Maria Gonzalez's knees went weak. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open. Zoe Chen nearly dropped her phone as her live stream spiked past 90,000 viewers, the chat exploding in all caps. "He's FBI. The salute, OMG. This is history." Gerald's legs buckled, and he sank halfway into his chair, his heart pounding. Saluting him? That wasn't possible. That wasn't how things worked. People in hoodies didn't get saluted by the FBI. but the scene unfolding before him told a different story. Agent Williams shook Marcus Ellington's hand firmly. "Sir, apologies for the delay. We were tracking your compliance audit from HQ. The live feed accelerated our response." Marcus nodded once, calm, collected. "Your timing is perfect, Agent Williams. The evidence collection is complete." Gerald's face drained of color. Evidence collection. The words rang in his ears like a death sentence. He opened his mouth, desperate to claw back some control. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. He didn't identify himself. How was I supposed to know?" Marcus finally rose from his chair, towering over Gerald now. The calm that had carried him through the ordeal shifted, sharpening into something colder, more dangerous. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of final judgment. "You didn't need to know who I was, Mr. Whitman. That's the point of a compliance audit. You were being evaluated on how you treat customers, not on how you perform when you know someone is watching. And for 45 minutes, you demonstrated exactly why complaints have been filed against this branch." Mrs. Patterson let out an audible gasp. Maria Gonzalez pressed her hands to her lips, trembling. David Torres, the security guard, straightened as though standing at attention. Gerald shook his head rapidly. No, this isn't fair. I was following protocol. You accused me of fraud without reviewing a single page of documentation." Marcus interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. "You called the police because I refused to leave when all I asked was for my application to be reviewed. You said repeatedly that people like me don't belong in this bank. That, Mr. Whitman, is not protocol. That is prejudice." The words cut through Gerald like a blade. The live stream counter ticked past 100,000 viewers. Zoe whispered into her phone, "Y'all, he just laid him out. This manager's done. He's finished." Sandra Blake, the regional manager, was still on the phone line, her voice shrill and panicked. "Gerald, corporate is melting down. Do you understand what you've done? This isn't just one bad interaction. You've triggered a federal investigation on camera." Marcus placed the phone back on the desk gently, as though even that small act was calculated. His eyes locked on Gerald's, unblinking. "This evidence will be submitted to the Federal Reserve Board, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Your words, your actions, your performance, they are now permanent record." Gerald's body shook. His instincts screamed at him to fight back, to defend himself, but every argument sounded hollow, pathetic, even in his own mind. His arrogance, once so loud, was now crushed under the weight of truth. Special Agent Williams turned to the officers. "False report of fraud against a federal investigator, that's obstruction. Title 18, Section 1505, a federal felony. You understand the gravity, officers?" Martinez nodded gravely. Johnson whistled softly. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Patterson whispered, "Dear Lord." Maria's hands trembled, tears welling in her eyes at the sheer gravity of what she was witnessing. Gerald stumbled to his feet, panic finally breaking through his pride. Wait, I didn't know who he was." Marcus leaned. In his words, slow, deliberate, devastating. "You didn't need to know who I was. You just needed to know how to treat me." The livestream chat exploded, a wall of fire emojis, gasps, and declarations that Gerald's career was finished, and at that precise moment, above the roar of commentary and whispers, the heavy thrum of helicopter blades shook the glass windows of the bank. Heads turned toward the ceiling as the sound grew louder, closer. Through the wide windows, customers saw the sleek silhouette descending into the parking lot, scattering autumn leaves and sending news crews scrambling. The helicopter door opened. Out stepped Robert Chen, president of Midwest Trust Bank, flanked by corporate attorneys and crisis managers. His normally pristine composure was cracked, his phone glued to his ear, his face pale with panic. He strode toward the bank with the urgency of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Inside the lobby, Gerald collapsed back into his chair, whispering to himself in disbelief. And across from him, Marcus Ellington finally allowed himself. A full smile, calm, controlled, triumphant, the reckoning had only just begun. The thrum of helicopter blades rattled the windows of Midwest Trust Bank like the beat of war drums. Every head in the marble lobby turned toward the glass doors. The cameras never wavered. Zoe Chen's live stream counter rocketed past 120,000. Viewers, the chat now a flood of disbelief and excitement. Who brings a helicopter to a bank scandal? Oh, this is about to be bad for them. The president himself is coming. This is a full meltdown. The doors swung open with a gust of autumn air, and Robert Chen strode in. His $3,000 Navy suit looked immaculate, but his face was drawn tight with panic. Two corporate attorneys trailed behind him, their briefcases snapping shut and open as they frantically prepared statements. Beside them, Sarah Kim, Midwest Trust's chief legal counsel, looked as though she hadn't blinked in 10 minutes. President Chen was used to commanding a room, but the second he entered the lobby, he knew this was different. He didn't command this room. He walked into it as a man under judgment. The cameras turned on him. Customers who had been silent now lifted their phones higher, capturing his every movement. The live stream lit up with mocking captions. PR guy incoming. Damage control activated. Too late, buddy. At the center of it all sat Marcus Ellington, still in his plain black hoodie, as unshaken as ever. He didn't rise. He didn't need to. His calm was power enough. President Chen approached slowly, deliberately, like a man crossing a minefield. His phone was still pressed to his ear, but his words were now meant for the entire room. Yes, the stock is down 12%. No, we can't issue a statement yet. I'm at the branch now. I'll contain it. Contain it. The phrase rippled through the room like gasoline catching a spark. This wasn't just a situation. This was an inferno, and Chen was trying to smother it with his bare hands. When his eyes found Marcus, his stride faltered. For the first time in his career, the bank president's confidence broke. He saw not just a man in a hoodie, but a billionaire consultant with federal authority, a man who could dismantle his empire with a single phone call. "Doctor, no, Mr." Chen stumbled, his voice catching. He corrected himself quickly, respectful. "Careful. Mr. Ellington, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for this incident." The word hung there, incident, as if Gerald Whitman's humiliation, the false police call, the prejudice laid bare in front of thousands of witnesses, was nothing more than an administrative error. Marcus finally rose from his chair. His height, his bearing, his calm. Suddenly the hoodie no longer seemed casual. It looked deliberate, strategic. A uniform for the kind of man who wanted to see the truth of how he was treated when stripped of every marker of power. "President Chen," Marcus said evenly, "this is not an incident, this is systemic." Gasps filled the lobby. Even the attorneys' pens froze mid-note. Marcus turned slightly, his voice still calm but amplified now by the weight of the live stream, the crowd, the officers who stood silent as statues. "For the past 45 minutes, your branch manager has insulted me, profiled me, accused me of fraud, and involved law enforcement, all without reviewing my documentation. That is not a personal error. That is culture. That is policy. That is your institution." The words landed like hammer blows. President Chen's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to deflect, to minimize. But he could feel the cameras watching. He could see the elderly Mrs. Patterson glaring at him with the sharp, unwavering judgment of a woman who had trusted his bank for 40 years. He could see Maria Gonzalez trembling behind the counter, torn between fear of her job and rage at the injustice she'd witnessed, and most damning of all, he could see Special Agent Marcus Williams standing at Marcus Ellington's side, arms crossed, his badge gleaming. "Mr. Ellington," Chen said carefully, "please, Let's discuss this in private. We can find a resolution that is appropriate." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile, controlled and deliberate. "This began in public. It will end in public." The lobby erupted in murmurs, nods, whispers of agreement. The live-stream chat lit up. Public accountability, yes. He's not letting them hide this. This guy is a legend. Robert Chen's attorneys shifted uneasily. Sarah Kim stepped forward, her voice calm but strained. "Mr. Ellington, Midwest Trust is prepared to issue a formal apology and compensation for the distress caused today." "No," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like steel. "This is not about apologies. This is about compliance, about civil rights, about systemic discrimination that has cost countless customers their dignity and their opportunities." He turned, addressing not just Chen, but the crowd, the officers, the cameras. "In the last 18 months, this branch has denied loans to 67% of black applicants, while approving 88% of white applicants with the same or worse credit profiles. That is not coincidence. That is not protocol. That is discrimination." The shock was palpable. Maria's breath caught audibly. Mrs. Patterson clutched her chest. The live-stream counter surged to 150,000. Gerald, slumped in his chair, looked as though he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His lips moved, but no words came. President Chen's face paled. He had known complaints existed. He had known whispers circled his branches, but to hear it laid bare in front of customers, police, and a live audience of thousands, it was catastrophic. Marcus stepped closer, his voice a quiet blade. "Today, Mr. Whitman didn't just expose himself. He exposed you. He showed us exactly what kind of culture you've fostered, and now the evidence is permanent." Outside, news crews pressed against the glass, their cameras flashing. Inside, every phone was raised higher, capturing the downfall of a legacy in real time. And in that moment, Gerald Whitman's arrogance was no longer the story. The story was a billionaire in a hoodie, standing calm and unbroken, dismantling an empire. With nothing but facts, patience, and truth, the reckoning had widened. This wasn't about one man anymore. This was about Midwest Trust Bank. This was about an entire industry, and the world, 200,000 live-stream viewers now, was watching. The marble lobby of Midwest Trust felt less like a bank now, and more like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written. The jury wasn't 12 people in a box. It was 200,000 live-stream viewers, dozens of customers clutching their phones, and a crowd outside pressing against the glass as news cameras jostled for angles. Gerald Whitman sat slumped at his desk, pale and trembling. Every ounce of arrogance had drained from him, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who knew his career had ended before his body had the chance to catch up. His assistant manager, Kevin Walsh, hovered near the teller counter, nervously tugging at his tie, trying to look invisible. But invisibility was impossible here. President Robert Chen stood in the center of the lobby, his attorneys flanking him like nervous shadows. He looked smaller than he ever had, his carefully curated air of power unraveling under the weight of public exposure. His eyes kept darting to Marcus Ellington, as though every breath he took required permission from the man in the hoodie who now owned the room. And Marcus, still calm, still steady, allowed the silence to stretch long enough to make every person present squirm. He wanted them to feel the weight of the moment. He wanted it carved into their memories. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried like a command. Accountability begins with names. Every phone in the room tilted toward him. He turned to Gerald first. "Gerald Whitman, branch manager. For 23 years, you believed your instincts mattered more than facts, more than humanity. Today, those instincts cost your institution millions and your career everything. You are terminated effective immediately." The gasp in the room was sharp, collective. Gerald's lips parted, his body twitching as if to protest, but no words came. The weight of the cameras pinned him in place. Marcus didn't wait. He turned his gaze to the younger man by the teller line. Kevin Walsh, assistant manager. You witnessed discrimination for 45 minutes. You heard the insults, the threats, the bias, and you chose silence. You chose safety over justice. That silence makes you complicit. You are suspended pending full federal investigation. Kevin's face went white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I didn't know what to do, he stammered weakly. You knew exactly what to do, Marcus replied, his voice cutting. You chose not to. The crowd murmured in agreement. The live stream chat erupted. Complicit fired. Yes, call them out. This is history in real time. Marcus turned now to President Chen, his gaze unyielding. This branch is not an isolated failure. It is a symptom of your institution's disease. 17 federal complaints. 67% denial rates for black applicants compared to 12% for whites with similar qualifications. These aren't mistakes. These are patterns. And today, those patterns were exposed. Chen swallowed hard, sweat glistening at his temple. His attorneys shifted nervously, papers clutched but useless in their hands. Marcus let the silence breathe, then laid out his terms like a judge delivering sentence. Here are the conditions if Midwest Trust wishes to continue. Operating under federal charter. The lobby leaned in, phones lifted higher. Even the officers froze, listening. First, Marcus began, his voice measured, deliberate, immediate termination of all personnel who participated in discriminatory practices. Whitman is banned from banking permanently. Walsh is suspended and subject to investigation. Second, a $5 million community development fund dedicated to minority-owned businesses, administered by independent oversight, not by Midwest Trust. A ripple of gasps spread. Gerald's head snapped up, his eyes wide. 5 million. Third, Marcus continued, never breaking cadence. Mandatory quarterly bias training for every employee, administered by federal contractors. Failure equals termination. Mrs. Patterson nodded sharply, her face flushed with vindication. Fourth, real-time discrimination monitoring software installed in every branch, reporting directly to federal regulators. The attorneys scribbled furiously. Sarah Kim's hand shook as she tried to keep up. Fifth, a full review of every loan denial from the past 24 months. Customers found to have been discriminated against will receive priority reconsideration and compensation. Maria. Gonzalez's hand shot to her mouth. She whispered, "Oh my God," as the implications hit her. Hundreds of families in her community would finally get justice. Sixth, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly now, cutting through the tension. Quarterly community audits, conducted by independent civil rights organizations. And those results will be made public. The livestream counter tipped past 230,000 viewers. Comments flew in. This man is saving banking. Systemic change live. This is the new civil rights movement. Marcus paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. His eyes lingered on Maria, on Mrs. Patterson, on David Torres, who stood like a soldier awaiting orders. Then he spoke the final requirement. Seventh, immediate promotion of individuals who demonstrated integrity today. Maria Gonzalez, you are appointed interim branch manager, effective immediately. Your first responsibility is implementing these changes. Maria's knees nearly buckled. She staggered forward, tears filling her eyes. Me, I don't. You do, Marcus said firmly, because you knew this was wrong. And you found your voice even when your supervisor told you to stay silent. That courage is what this institution needs. The lobby erupted in applause. Mrs. Patterson clapped furiously. David Torres nodded, pride flashing across his face. Even Officer Martinez allowed himself a faint smile. President Chen stood frozen, his attorneys whispering frantically in his ear. He finally found his voice, though it wavered. "Mr. Ellington, these demands, they're non-negotiable," Marcus cut in, his tone final. "The alternative is federal seizure of assets, criminal investigation, and revocation of your banking charter. Choose carefully." The words fell like thunder. Outside, the news helicopters circled. Inside, the live stream surged past 250,000 viewers, hashtags exploding across the country. Gerald Whitman covered his face with his hands, realizing the cameras were capturing the collapse of his life. Kevin Walsh leaned against the counter, pale and trembling. Maria Gonzalez stood straighter, still overwhelmed, but now burning with a fire she didn't know she had. And Marcus Ellington, the billionaire in a hoodie, stood in the middle of the lobby, calm, unflinching and undeniable as an entire institution. Bent under the weight of his truth, the reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. The sound of helicopter blades had barely faded, but the storm Marcus Ellington unleashed was only gathering strength. Midwest Trust's marble lobby, once a quiet place of deposits and small talk, had transformed into the epicenter of a national reckoning. Phones pointed in every direction. Reporters pressed their faces against the glass, shoving microphones. Toward the doors, the livestream viewer counter on Zoe Chen's phone spun upward like a slot machine. 300,000. 350,000. 400,000. Her teenage hands shook as she whispered into the mic, This is history." Inside, silence hung heavy. Robert Chen, the bank president, stood stiff in his tailored suit, sweat pooling beneath his collar. His attorneys whispered frantic strategies, but each word fell flat in the face of reality. The customers weren't leaving, the officers weren't moving. The live stream wasn't slowing, and Marcus Ellington, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. His calm had become the most terrifying thing in the room. He stood as though every second of Gerald Whitman's collapse, every panicked look from Robert Chen, every phone capturing his presence, all of it had been inevitable. Then the world outside the bank collided with the world inside. Phones buzzed in unison. Notifications exploded. A voice from the back shouted, "Senator Washington just tweeted it." Another chimed in. Congressman Davis shared the stream. The lobby buzzed with gasps as customers read their screens aloud. Systemic discrimination in banking is real. Watch what's happening at Midwest Trust. We need accountability now. The livestream chat was a blur. This is on CNN. Breaking on MSNBC. Stock down 15%. Robert Chen's phone lit up again, vibrating violently. Against his palm. He glanced at the caller ID and nearly stumbled. Board of directors. He didn't dare answer. Not yet, Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but carrying like a gavel strike. President Chen, every moment you delay is another nail in your institution's coffin. The world is watching. The evidence is here. Your branch's discriminatory practices are no longer whispers. They are documented fact. So tell me, will you comply or will you collapse? The weight of his words pressed on everyone. Gerald Whitman groaned quietly, burying his face in his hands. Kevin Walsh shifted miserably, pale as paper. Maria Gonzalez stood tall, her blazer still faintly wrinkled from the teller booth, but her shoulders squared with new resolve. Robert Chen looked at the cameras, at his attorneys, at his ruined manager. For decades he had built an empire on prestige and image. Now both were unraveling live, in front of hundreds of thousands. His lips parted. "Mr. Ellington," he said softly, each word dragged from his throat. "Midwest Trust accepts your conditions." The lobby gasped. The live-stream chat detonated. He did it. They surrendered. History live. But Marcus wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space. His eyes locked on Chen's, unblinking, merciless. Acceptance is not enough. Action begins now. Gerald Whitman is suspended immediately. Kevin Walsh is relieved of duty pending investigation. Maria Gonzalez assumes management today, not tomorrow, not Monday. Today. Maria blinked, stunned, tears prickling her eyes. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together, her voice trembling. Justice. Finally. Chen nodded slowly, his voice breaking. Done. Marcus continued. Your $5 million community fund will be established within 72 hours. Bias training begins within the month. The monitoring software must be installed before the next quarter, and every denied loan for the past 2 years will be reopened for review. Do you understand? Chen swallowed hard. Yes! Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice sharp as a blade. Understand this too. This isn't a negotiation. This is survival. Fail once and your charter is gone. Fail twice and your freedom may follow. The attorneys shifted uneasily, but none dared speak. Then, as if on cue, Zoe's phone buzzed again. She gasped. Y'all, the White House just reposted it. The lobby froze. The implications hit like a shockwave. This wasn't just a bank scandal anymore. It was national policy, federal oversight, the eyes of the country locked on a single branch in a Midwest city. Outside, protesters were already gathering, holding makeshift signs. End banking discrimination. Justice in finance. We stand with Ellington. News anchors adjusted their earpieces, preparing for live shots. Stock tickers scrolled red across television screens in bars, airports, living rooms across America. Inside, Marcus Ellington simply closed his leather portfolio, the red light of his recorder still glowing. Today, he said softly, his voice carrying like scripture, you all witnessed how arrogance crumbles, how truth endures, and how silence becomes complicity. But you also witnessed courage. Courage. From those who chose to speak when it mattered most. That is how change begins, and that is how it will continue. The applause began hesitantly, then swelled. Customers clapped. Mrs. Patterson stood tall, tears streaking her face as she applauded. Maria Gonzalez, trembling, lifted her chin and joined in. Even David Torres, the security guard, clapped firmly, his military bearing giving way to pride. Gerald Whitman did not move. He sat slumped, hollow, broken, as his life unraveled in real time. And above them all, the live-stream viewer counter tipped over 500,000. The scandal had become a movement, and Marcus Ellington, the billionaire in the hoodie, was no longer just a man in a bank. He was the face of a revolution. The clock ticked to 3:47 p.m., but time inside Midwest Trust Bank no longer felt real. The marble lobby, once a sterile chamber of transactions, had transformed into a crucible of reckoning. Customers who had come to cash checks or deposit pay. Stubbs now found themselves witnesses to the collapse of arrogance and the birth of something far larger than any single branch. Phones were everywhere. Dozens of cameras caught the moment Robert Chen, president of the bank, lowered his head and agreed to Marcus Ellington's terms. Outside, the street buzzed with chanting, news vans and homemade signs. The live-stream counter surged again, 600,000, 700,000, 820,000. But Marcus wasn't done. He hadn't chosen this branch by accident, and now, with the world watching, he was ready to reveal why. He lifted his portfolio, the black leather case that had been mocked as probably food stamp. In paperwork less than an hour ago. He set it squarely on Gerald Whitman's desk, letting the gesture command silence. The red light of his recorder blinked steadily. Then he spoke. This isn't the first time Midwest Trust has discriminated. This branch, Commerce Street, has been under federal scrutiny for months. 17 formal complaints, nearly 1,000 loan denials that defy every statistical model. And behind those numbers are families, Dreams, lives that could have flourished if not for men like Whitman. The lobby went deathly quiet. Maria Gonzalez's hand trembled against her blazer. Mrs. Patterson gripped her handbag tighter. Her jaw set. Kevin Walsh flinched at every word. Marcus's tone sharpened. Do you know why I walked into this branch in a hoodie? Because 3 months ago a young black entrepreneur, bright, ambitious, with spotless credit, walked into this same lobby with a business plan for a tech startup. Gerald denied him without a second glance. That entrepreneur's name was Jamal Harris. He applied here 3 times, each time with better documentation, each time denied. Do you know where Jamal is now? He paused, letting the silence stretch. Dead. He took his life 6 weeks ago after drowning in debt he never should have had. Debt that a fair loan could have prevented. His mother wrote to the Federal Reserve. Her words reached my desk. And that is why I am here. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth. Maria's eyes filled with tears. David Torres closed his eyes, his jaw tightening as if trying to contain a wave of rage. The live stream exploded. Oh my God! This just broke me. Say his name. Jamal. The comments blurred with grief and fury, the story transforming. In real time, from a scandal into a cause. Gerald's face went ashen. He stammered, I don't remember. You don't remember, Marcus repeated, his voice like steel. Because to you, Jamal Harris was just another dreamer with no real money. But to his family, he was everything. And to this community, his death is on your hands. The applause and gasps had ceased. What filled the lobby now was raw, uncomfortable silence. The silence of guilt laid bare. President Chen looked as though the floor might swallow him whole. His attorneys stopped scribbling. Their pens dangled uselessly in their hands. For the first time in his career, Chen seemed stripped of every illusion of control. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding. Understand this. Discrimination isn't theoretical. It destroys, it robs, it kills. And the reason we conduct unannounced audits is to see who people are when they think no one is watching. Today, Gerald Whitman showed the world who he is, but more importantly, Midwest Trust showed who it has allowed itself to become. The live stream counter surged again, 1.1 million. Hashtags exploded, Not Justice for Jamal, Ellington Protocol, La Banking While Black. Mrs. Patterson finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. I knew Jamal. He fixed my computer once. Brilliant young man, he didn't deserve that. She turned her eyes on Chen, her fury piercing. His blood is on your hands too. Robert Chen nearly collapsed. His attorneys steadied him, whispering frantically, but he shook them off. His voice was hoarse, cracked. Mr. Ellington, I can't undo what happened, but I will do everything in my power to ensure no more Jamals are lost to our failures. No, Marcus corrected. His eyes bore into Chen. You will do everything in my power. The days of Midwest Trust controlling the narrative are over. The Richardson Protocol, he lifted his portfolio slightly, will govern your compliance moving forward. Federal oversight, real-time monitoring, and community accountability, or Midwest Trust ceases to exist. Is that understood? Chen bowed his head. Yes. The cameras caught it all. The billionaire in a hoodie delivering terms like a general to a defeated army. The man who had been mocked, profiled, and humiliated standing tall while an empire bent to him. And for the first time since he entered the bank, Marcus Ellington let the faintest edge of emotion crack through his composure. His voice softened, but it carried weight beyond law or finance. This is for Jamal Harris, and for every other name we don't yet know. The lobby erupted, applause, sobs, shouts of agreement. Maria wiped her eyes as she clapped. Mrs. Patterson stood, her voice breaking as she chanted, Justice for Jamal. Customers joined in. The chant grew louder, echoing through the marble lobby, spilling out into the streets where protesters picked it up. amplifying it into a roar. Justice for Jamal! Justice for Jamal! Justice for Jamal! The livestream counter hit 1.5 million. Across the nation, television anchors broke into programming. Hashtags dominated Twitter. Senators demanded hearings. Wall Street trembled. And in the lobby of Midwest Trust Bank, a single man's dignity had ignited a movement. Gerald Whitman sat hollow, broken, forgotten. Kevin Walsh stared at the floor, knowing his silence had cost him everything. Robert Chen, the once untouchable bank president, stood humbled, powerless in front of his customers, and Marcus Ellington, calm, unshaken, had turned a humiliating insult into the spark of a revolution. The chant thundered through the marble lobby, echoing off the high ceilings and rattling the glass doors. Justice for Jamal! Justice for Jamal! What had begun as a murmur from Mrs. Patterson had grown into a roar, swelling with every voice inside the branch until it spilled into the street outside. The protesters took it up, then the reporters, and soon the cry pulsed through microphones, phones, and live streams across the country. Marcus Ellington stood at the center of it all, silent but commanding. His hoodie hung loose over his broad shoulders, his leather portfolio at his side, the red light of his recorder still glowing. He didn't need to chant. His presence was enough. Gerald Whitman sat slumped at his desk, his face hollow, his hands covering his eyes. The chant wasn't for him, but it was a death knell all the same. He was already finished, his reputation, his career, his name all synonymous now with systemic hate. Kevin Walsh leaned against the telecounter, pale and shaking his silence, having branded him complicit. But President Robert Chen, his empire trembling under his feet, was forced to stand in the fire. The chant rolled around him like judgment. He was sweating through his tailored suit, his tie loosened, his attorneys whispering panicked advice that dissolved the moment it hit the air. He had come expecting to control the damage. Instead, he was being dismantled in front of the nation. Marcus raised one hand, palm open. Slowly, the chant subsided. Phones steadied. Reporters pressed closer against the glass. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. He spoke not just to the people in the room, but to the millions watching. His voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of steel. Jamal Harris is not just a name. He is a symbol of what happens when dignity is stripped by prejudice. He represents every denied mortgage, every rejected small business loan, every student told their dream was too ambitious. He represents every time someone in power decided that people like me, people like him, were not worthy of equal treatment. Today that ends. The words crackled through the air like lightning. The livestream counter soared past 1.8 million. Screens around the world lit up with his face. Marcus turned to Chen. You called this an incident, but this is no incident. This is systemic rot, and now the rot has been exposed. You can no longer hide it in boardrooms and quarterly reports. Today, the world saw it raw, unfiltered, undeniable, and now you will answer for it. Chen's lips quivered. He wanted to argue, to deflect, but every camera was pointed at him. His attorneys shifted uneasily, their silence an admission of defeat. Here is what happens next, Marcus continued, pacing slowly, deliberately, like a teacher in a lecture hall. Every branch of Midwest Trust will undergo immediate federal audit. Your quarterly data will no longer be filed quietly to regulators. It will be published, transparent, accessible to the public. Your customers deserve to know the truth. Your investors deserve to see the risks you've created, and your employees deserve to be free of a culture that punishes integrity and rewards silence. Gasps rippled again. The attorneys scribbled notes, their pens nearly breaking under the force of their grip, but Marcus wasn't done. He turned, his eyes sweeping the lobby. They landed on Maria Gonzalez, who now stood straighter than she ever had, pride and fear mingling in her chest. "This woman will lead the Commerce Street branch," Marcus declared, "because courage must be rewarded, and because leadership must reflect the people it serves." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled freely now. Customers clapped, their approval echoing louder than any corporate boardroom decision. "And this man," Marcus added, pointing at David Torres, the security guard, "will oversee community relations, because he chose vigilance without prejudice. He chose restraint when others chose arrogance." David stiffened, military pride flashing in his eyes. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice steady. Gerald groaned again, his head sinking lower. The humiliation had long passed public scandal. It was now complete erasure. Marcus turned back to Chen. "You wanted to handle this quietly. You wanted to spin it. But you no longer have that luxury. This is the new standard. The Ellington standard. You will comply, or you will collapse." The live stream chat exploded. Ellington standard. Justice for Jamal. Banking revolution. Chen finally bowed his head, defeated. "We will comply." But Marcus wasn't finished. He stepped forward, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of the bank president. His voice dropped, but the microphones caught every word. "You should understand why I chose this branch. Why today? Why you?" Chen looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his voice barely audible. "Why?" Marcus leaned in, his tone cold, deliberate. "Because arrogance is predictable. Because Whitman was exactly who I knew he'd be when faced with someone he didn't recognize as wealthy or powerful. And because systemic rot can only be revealed in its natural state. You gave me everything I needed, and now the entire nation has seen it." The gasp that followed wasn't just from the lobby. It came from millions of screens, millions of viewers realizing they hadn't just watched a confrontation. They had watched a sting. Marcus straightened, his expression calm once more. "My work here is done." He closed his portfolio, tucking it under his arm. The red light on his recorder flicked off. The crowd outside roared louder, their chants filling the air, their signs pressing against the glass. The live stream counter ticked. Past 2 million. Gerald Whitman buried his face in his hands. Kevin Walsh leaned against the counter, broken. Robert Chen stood gutted, stripped of every illusion of power. And Marcus Ellington, the billionaire in a hoodie, the man they tried to dismiss, walked calmly toward the glass doors, ready to face the cameras, the reporters, and the roar of a movement he had just ignited. The revolution wasn't coming. It was already here. The glass doors of Midwest Trust Bank groaned open, and the roar from outside rushed in like a tidal wave. The chants shook the air. "Justice for Jamal. No more discrimination. Ellington, Ellington, Ellington." Marcus Ellington stepped into the chaos, his leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm, his hoodie pulled low against the glare of television floodlights. The marble lobby behind him dissolved into insignificance. Out here, the movement was alive. Hundreds had gathered. Protesters waved hastily made signs, some on cardboard, others on poster board, scrawled in permanent marker, "End banking racism. Loans for all, not just some. Justice in finance." Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, cameras snapping rapid fire. News vans lined Commerce Street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Helicopters circled above, their spotlights carving through the dimming sky, and the live-stream counter on Zoe Chen's phone surged past 2.5 million. Her voice trembled as she narrated into her mic, "Y'all, Marcus Ellington is walking out right now. The FBI, the bank president, the whole world just saw what happened. This is bigger than anything we've ever seen." The energy was electric, furious, hopeful. President Robert Chen followed behind, flanked by his lawyers, his once pristine image in tatters. He tried to move quietly, hoping the cameras would forget him, But they didn't. Reporters turned, hurling. Questions. President Chen, did Midwest Trust knowingly discriminate against black borrowers? Are you facing federal charges? Will you resign? Chen's lips parted, but no sound came. Every answer would be twisted into evidence. Every word was a noose. He lowered his head, letting the noise swallow him. Behind him, Gerald Whitman stumbled out, his face ashen, his suit crumpled. The crowd recognized him instantly, the man in the viral video who had mocked, sneered, called the cops. Boos exploded. Some shouted his name. "There's the racist manager!" Shame. "You ruined lives, Whitman." His legs buckled, and he had to be half carried by security. Kevin Walsh trailed after, pale, eyes downcast, as though wishing the pavement itself would open up and swallow him whole. But Marcus didn't look back. He stood tall on the steps, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. When he raised his hand, the chants fell into silence, the microphone steadied, the floodlights shifted onto him. He spoke, not with the fire of a preacher, but with the steel calm of a man who knew the truth didn't need embellishment. Today you witnessed what happens when arrogance is stripped of its disguise. A manager thought he could decide who was worthy of dignity. A bank thought it could bury patterns of discrimination behind policies and paperwork. They were wrong. Because when the truth is documented, when silence becomes courage, change becomes inevitable. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. The live-stream comments blurred with hearts, flames, and cries of "Yes!" Marcus continued, his voice carrying into the night. This was never just about me. It was about Jamal Harris. It was about every family denied a mortgage for the color of their skin. Every small business owner turned away because they didn't fit the banker's picture of success. It was about every person who was told, silently or out loud, "People like you don't belong here." Well, today we proved something. We do belong. We always did. The chants resumed, louder now, a chorus of defiance and hope. "We belong! We belong!" Marcus lifted his portfolio, showing the red recorder light. For 45 minutes, this device captured the truth. But it wasn't just my recorder. It was every phone in this room, every live stream, every witness who refused to stay silent. Together you turned prejudice into evidence. You turned humiliation into justice. Zoe's phone screen nearly crashed as the counter soared past 3 million. She whispered, almost in tears, "This is bigger than anything I've ever streamed." Marcus's gaze hardened, shifting toward the cameras. To every bank watching, to every institution that thinks prejudice is policy, let this be your warning. We are coming, we are watching, and we are documenting. This is the beginning of a new era. An era where justice is not a favor, but a requirement. Where every Jamal Harris will have his chance to build, to dream, to live. The roar that followed shook the street. Protesters cheered, reporters shouted. Questions, but for once, Marcus's words drowned out everything. Behind him, FBI Special Agent Marcus Williams stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the floodlights. He saluted Ellington once more, the gesture caught by every camera, every live stream, every headline that would dominate the morning. And in that moment, the symbolism was undeniable. The federal government standing behind a black billionaire in a hoodie who had just dismantled decades of unchecked discrimination in real time. Gerald Whitman, dragged through the crowd, would be remembered not as a banker, but as a cautionary tale. Robert Chen, once a titan of finance, was reduced to a trembling shadow of compliance. Maria Gonzalez, inside, was already seated at Gerald's old desk, her nameplate being slid into place. David Torres, her partner in rebuilding trust, greeted customers with a new badge that read Community Relations Coordinator, and Marcus Ellington, and calm as ever descended the steps into the sea of cameras, chants, and signs. The chant shifted again, rising into something new, something bigger. Ellington Standard. Ellington Standard. The phrase trended within minutes. Hashtags erupted. Politicians drafted statements. Wall Street analysts panicked as Midwest Trust's stock spiraled. Civil rights lawyers clipped the live stream, preparing lawsuits. Families in neighborhoods across the country whispered hope for the first time in years. Marcus Ellington didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply walked through the roar, his gaze steady, as though already seeing beyond this night, beyond the bank, beyond the scandal. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a movement, and history had just turned a page.